Hello and welcome back to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. Today we're going to be asking ourselves a question. Do you ever, stand at the edge of something that looks impossible and then you feel like, I need some confirmation before going. I need some, some proof, some confirmation, some motivation, right? But oftentimes God calls his people to step before the waters begin to part. And in Joshua chapter 3, we're going to unpack the Ark of the Covenant, the crossing of the Jordan, and what it means to follow God even when the way forward is hidden. And I'll give you one immediate action to help you move forward from hesitation into trust in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Okay, let's get a little bit of context into the chapter now. Okay, so Joshua chapter 3, it's going to tell us the story. How did Israel cross the Jordan into the promised land? Right, the priests are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, they go first, the waters stop, and the people pass through on dry ground. Very similar to something we saw in Exodus chapter 14, by the way, when Moses parted the Red Sea and they were able to walk through. And the chapter shows that entry into the promise is not powered by human momentum, but by God's holy presence leading the way. Okay, let's read the first 4 verses. The focus here is going to be the people preparing. They're going to keep their distance from the ark. And my question for you to stay focused is, why do they need to follow at a distance instead of rushing ahead? Verse 1, early in the morning Joshua rose and set out from Shittim with all the Israelites, and they came to the Jordan. They camped there before crossing over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, when you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priests, then you shall set out from your place, follow it, so that you may know the way you should go. For you have not passed this way before, yet there shall be a space between you and it, a distance of about 2,000 cubits. Do not come any nearer to it. Okay, biblical unlock number 1. Why does the ark go ahead and the people stay back? The reason why is because God's presence leads and the people are not in control of it. The distance actually teaches that reverence is not a human project with religious decoration attached, but it is a holy crossing that is led by God himself. Remember that the Ark of the Covenant represents and marks the place where God's rule is active and present in the middle of the journey. And Augustine often treated this, the way of sacred distance, as teaching reverence, that holiness in this case is not some casual endeavor that you engage in. It is ordered around God's promise. Remember back in Numbers, when we read Numbers chapter 1, the Ark of the Covenant was in the central place of the entire camp, and all of the other tents were surrounded around the Ark of the Covenant. And that's important. God should be the center of your life and bleeding into every other aspect that you see. Okay, let's read verses 5 to 6 now. Joshua is going to sanctify the people, and the priests take the ark first. Why, though, does holiness come before movement? Let's read verse 5. Then Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. To the priest Joshua said, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on in front of the people. So they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went in front of the people. Okay, biblical unlock number 1. Why does Joshua tell the people to sanctify themselves before crossing? Again, because before God gives a new chapter to a particular book or your life, he sets apart a people. What is sanctification here? Sanctification is about readiness. They must be inwardly and outwardly prepared to receive what God is about to do. The priests going first, that shows that worship precedes conquest. The journey into the promised lands begins at a place of holiness, right? Not a human endeavor. Am I holy before the Lord? That is what is actually taking place in this particular instance. So they sanctify themselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Sanctification, right? The preparation is what matters, because the soul must be ready to receive God's gifts. Okay, let's read verses 7 to 13 now. the focus here is going to be God promising to exalt Joshua and stop the Jordan. And my engagement question for you is, why does God lead through visible miracle instead of an instant explanation? This is a very important point. Verse 7. The Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so that they may know that I will be with you as I was with Moses. You are the one who shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant. When you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan." Joshua then said to the Israelites, "Draw near and hear the words of the Lord your God." Joshua said, "By this you shall know that among you is the living God, who without fail will drive out from before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. The ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is going to pass before you into the Jordan. So now select 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. When the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, come to rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan flowing from above shall be cut off. They shall stand in a single heap." Okay, biblical unlock number 3. Why does God promise to magnify Joshua before the people? Why is it, right? The reason is because, in this case, leadership needs a public confirmation, and God is actually backing Joshua so the people can trust the transition from Moses. Be strong and courageous is what we heard in Joshua chapter 1, right? And it is God proving that the same power that opened the sea can open the river as well, okay? And the idea here is that authority must be God-given, not self-made, and that true leadership is often established by that divine action. And how do we establish that divine action? By listening to God's words, by praying to God, by recognizing God's providence and authority over the scriptures. And what's interesting as well is God uses the ark and the priests instead of just parting the water immediately. And it's interesting why he would do that is because the crossing is meant to teach dependence, right? Imagine as they're walking through the parted waters, at any point God could simply cause the waters to fall on them again, right? It requires radical trust. It's almost as if when Peter was on the water, right? And he's walking on the water towards the Lord, and then he loses faith and then he starts to sink. But he forgot that the eternal God of the universe was standing there with him. And it was only when he lost faith, that is when he started sinking. So the obedient movement, right? That trust that God will do what only he can do. Okay, let's read verses 14 to 17 now. The focus here is going to be on the waters parting, and the people are going to cross onto the dry ground. And my question for you to stay focused is, why does God make a way only when the feet step in? Verse 14. When the people set out from their tents to cross over the Jordan, the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant were in front of the people. Now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. So when those who bore the Ark had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the Ark were dipped in the edge of the waters flowing from above stood still, rising up in a single heap, far off at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, while those flowing towards the sea of Arabah, the Dead Sea, were wholly cut off. Then the people crossed over opposite Jericho. While all Israel were crossing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan until the entire nation finished crossing over the Jordan. Joshua chapter 3. Why does the Jordan stop only when the priest's feet touch the water? It's so fascinating, and I think this is one of the most important things from this entire chapter. Stepping, right? Dipping your feet in the water, because God often meets faith at the edge, right? The act of stepping in is the sign that Israel trusts the promise more than the obstacle. Imagine, they could say, well, there's a bunch of water here, I'm not going to go forward because I don't know how we meant to walk. It's a massive ocean or river, whatever. But the dry ground, that recalls the Red Sea. The God who delivered them from slavery now brings them into inheritance. And this is what is so important. Faith is stepping into God's promise before seeing the outcome, right? And courage should be grounded in God's past faithfulness, what he has done in the past and how he will continue to enact his greater purposes with you. All we need to do is dip our toes in the water and let God do the rest. Okay, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. So, Joshua chapter 3 is a crossing story, and in Christ, the crossing reaches its deepest meaning, because Jesus, he leads people through what they cannot cross alone, not only water, but death, judgment, and fear. And the ark going ahead points forward to God's presence leading the way, because in Christ, God's presence is not just a symbol, he is a person. He goes before his people and opens the way into the inheritance that no river can block. And what do we read in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 29? Even though this is referring to the Red Sea incident that we saw in Exodus chapter 14, this is equally important, right? In Hebrews chapter 11 verse 29 we read, "By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land, but when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned." Now this equally applies in this case as well, because we have another sea, or in this case a river, and it's being split, and God allows them to pass through, right? And what it shows us is that Joshua chapter 3 is a call to faith. God still makes a way for those who move when he speaks, when they dip their feet in the river, in the water, and trust God's presence, stepping into God's promise before you can see the outcome, so that he can work with you. You know, they say God can't steer a parked car. You need to have that desire, that drive to keep going, regardless of what you can or cannot see. Okay, how can we apply this chapter in our everyday life? There are things that we postpone because it feels too uncertain. There are things that we feel anxious about. We feel immense dread over, right? Because we feel that we have to carry the entire burden on ourselves. But what we need to do is take one obedient step this week before you have every answer. There are going to be times where you are anxious. There are going to be times where you are apprehensive. You're on the edge, but you need to take a step. Why? Because that is precisely when God acts. They took a step. They dipped their feet into the water, and God moved the entire river so that they could pass through. And the second thing is sanctification before movement. Before a difficult conversation or decision or anything, you need to pause and pray and ask for God to go ahead of you rather than to just bless your plan, right? Because we can ask, "Oh Lord, bless me with this and give me this and do all of these things," but you need to pray for a minute and ask for God to go ahead of you, and not just as a cosmic vending machine to give you whatever you want. Alright, so that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. We learnt that God's presence leads the people into the land. They do not lead themselves. That sanctification comes before crossing and readiness matters. That the priests and the ark show that worship precedes conquest, and that God confirms Joshua publicly so that the people can trust the transition. And that faith often requires stepping into the water before the way is visible, right? Before the outcome is materialized, you need to be able to take that leap so that you can see God work in your life. Next time, we're going to move from crossing the Jordan to the memorial stones and renewal of fear and faith in Joshua chapter 4. We're going to unpack how God teaches a people to remember what he has done. You don't want to miss it. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.